Hello and welcome to the Mobile Artisan. We are doing a paint party today for free through social media because everybody is stuck at home from the coronavirus. So if you don't know already, this is a little peek at the piece that we're going to be doing today. It's a poppy fields painting. It's in acrylic. This one was painted just as a sample on paper, but you should already have your 11 by 14 canvas. This can also be done on 8 by 10 canvas, and really it could be done on a heavy duty paper as well, so like a watercolor paper. This one was a pretty thin paper that I did it on, so it kind of curled up on the edges, but since we're all stuck at home, you can use whatever materials that you have available to you. As far as brushes go, you need a larger flat brush, a smaller round brush. I also have this medium-sized flat brush, and I'm not sure yet today if I'll use it or not. I already know that I can definitely get away without using it, but I do have it here in case. You'll need some kind of pencil, some kind of writing utensil. Just beware that with these mechanical pencils, these can sometimes poke through the canvas, especially for kids if you're a little rough on it. So just a normal graphite pencil works out really well too. You'll need a water jar. I really like my old mason jar that's got all my paint stains on it that I've used for years and years. And you'll need all of your paints. And I'm going to include a link for all of these when I post the video, but we have just a black, a white, a dark blue, a turquoise, a medium dark green, a light green. This one tends to go a little minty, and then a red. And again, since we're all stuck at home, and normally for paint parties I would bring all these things along, you just use whatever you have on hand. If you have a yellower light green, that is completely fine. If you have a turquoise that's a little bit more blue than a true turquoise, that is totally fine too. So to start, oh, also to all of you parents out there, acrylic paint will stain, which is what we're using today. So make sure you have some kind of surface behind your painting that you're not going to stain your table. And then I have on my super old painting smock today too, just to make sure that I don't get anything on my clothes today. If you do get a little bit on your clothes, then just make sure you wash it off right away. Also, to keep the video a little bit shorter, I'm going to be working at my speed, so at any point you can stop the video for yourself and pause it so you can catch up to the point where I am. So to start, we are going to, let's review our piece one more time. So we've got our poppies in the foreground, and we've got our darker background, and then it moves up into the, as you get further away from the viewer, this lighter ground, and then we've got some trees in the background, trees further behind that, and then we've got some clouds in a blue sky. So to start, we're going to go about a third of a way down the painting. So 1, 2, 3. We're going to go about a third of the way from the top of the painting, and I just want you to draw a line straight across. And it doesn't matter if your line is straight or perfect or not, it is completely fine. And then we're going to real lightly just sketch in some of these trees from the background too. So I'm going to do some of these wiggly lines here. And then I'm going to go a ways to the other side and kind of do the same thing. And then we're going to do the trees in the background behind that. And make sure you just have some spacing in between here. And then let's go ahead and draw in one of the clouds there too. So you'll draw one line and then go a little lower and draw another line. And then our light source for this painting, it's an important thing when you're doing painting. Our light is going to be coming from this direction. So all of our shadows are going to be going off towards the right. So we're going to draw our clouds, just kind of make them floofy. And I personally like to have this little kind of tail leading towards the sun. And we'll get to that once we paint in the clouds. We'll have some nice little highlighting in there. And then we're going to draw in some of our poppies. And so poppies are these nice kind of light, kind of floppy flowers, I guess. That's not really a great term, but anyways, we're going to draw a couple that are kind of looking from above them and draw a little circle in there. And then I want to draw one that's kind of tipped up on its side, and there's a little center of it there as well. And you really can't do these poppies wrong. You just paint them, draw them in wherever you want to. And just fill in some good parts in the foreground here. And draw in our circles in the centers of those two. And I think I'll do one more right here. Another one kind of laying up on its side. And then we're going to draw a big bunch of them way off in the background. So under that line that we drew up at the top, I want you to draw another line going all the way across. And then this is just going to be a big grouping of flowers here together. So you can kind of draw like a squiggly line down at the bottom, because we're not going to define those flowers. That's just going to be a big patch of red. And then we'll go ahead and do that a little closer. And again, you can't go wrong with where you're laying in your color. So that's it. That's all that we need our pencil for at this point. So we're just going to set that aside. And then we're going to grab our small paintbrush here, our small round one. And basically all we're going to do is take our paint palette here, and we're going to go with this turquoise paint and just get some up on your brush. And all you're going to go back through now is line all of those pencil lines that you created. And you can do these lines kind of thick, because we're going to end up seeing this paint color come back through. So we're going to start here down at the bottom. And I want you to start with these poppies specifically. And then we're going to work our way up to the top, because when we paint our color in after we do this portion, we are going to work up from the bottom of the painting to the top of the painting. And you definitely do not need to be perfect with these lines. Your pencil lines are just kind of a guide at this point. I didn't mention before when I had my pencil out, but if you do make mistakes with your pencil, you can always erase them or just paint back over them when we get to that point. So again, I'm just going through and I'm just painting up over all of these lines, because we're going to have this nice turquoisey color come through as this really pretty contrast in between all of the paint colors that we put onto this canvas. I also really like to paint with my canvas laying down, especially if you're not super familiar with painting. Your paint can sometimes get a bit runny, and it always is a really big bummer when you use an easel and your paint starts to drip down the painting. That can really create a mess. So now I'm going in over these trees also, and we're going right up to the edge of the canvas. And this way, if you want to put it into a frame, or even if you want to paint the edges of it after we finish, then your painting's going to look nice and complete, because we've covered all of the white surfaces, which is our goal today. Besides having fun and distracting from all of the things that are going on, I myself have kids at home, so I'm making this video. It's nighttime here for me, so hopefully the lighting here is okay for you guys, because I have 2 kids under 3, and there's no way that I would be able to create this painting with them until, so we do lots of crafts during the day. In terms of who this painting might be good for, definitely adults, but I think that if you had a kid that likes art, 6-year-olds maybe, 6-year-olds and up, you might have to give them a little bit of help, but it'd be a really great project to do together with your kid. You could both sign it at the end. All right, so I've got all of my turquoise painted in. So I've got that brush, and I'm just going to rinse it off in my bit of water that I had. And make sure you get your brush all clean because acrylics dry, like I said, pretty quick. So we want to get our brush all clean in our water and then just dab it off on our paper towel. I hope I mentioned paper towel at the beginning of this, but you'll need a piece of paper towel or a old rag to dry your paintbrushes on. All right, now I'm going to switch to my big flat paintbrush, and we're going to paint in the green in the foreground of this painting. So we've got our dark green that we're going to start with, and we're just going to paint all the way up and cover the edges of that turquoise. And your paint should be pretty dry at this point. You saw it only took me a couple minutes to fill in over top of my pencil marks. And my paint down here is mostly dry. There are a couple spots that are a little bit more wet that I applied a little bit more heavy paint to. So we're just gonna go in and keep filling all of this. And again, you can see that I'm covering up this space between, covering up all that white that goes right up to the edge of the turquoise. And you can use your paintbrush flat, and then in some of those tight areas, I like to use my paintbrush on the side, so you get nice kind of sharp edge and a smaller surface to your brush, so it's easier to work around in some of those areas. And we're gonna go about a third of the way up the painting. So we're gonna make sure that we go around all of these larger flowers that are down in the foreground. Because we're gonna end up blending a little bit of our dark green and our light green, and it's a bit harder to do that when we're trying to work around some other shapes. And you can see I have lots of brush strokes in there, which is completely fine because this is kind of a grassy area with lots of flowers, and you get lots of textures and fields. All right, I'm going to keep working my way up. I'm going to go above this patch of red flowers here. And we're going to transition somewhere around here to our lighter green color. You can also get a little bit wavy with your brush when you're applying this green right along the edge of the turquoise, because then it just gives a little bit more life to those flowers again. All right. So now in terms of the depth of the painting, this is the area where you really start to lose focus on the things that are in the background. So we're losing the detail in our flowers. So we go from foreground to kind of middle ground to background and then the sky. So at this point, I want you to take your brush, and I'm not actually going to rinse it. I'm just going to wipe off, kind of swirl it around on your paper towel there. And then once you got some of that paint off, I want you to just dip it in your light green paint and start on lining the turquoise up here. And then we're going to work our way down towards this darker green. So I've laid in most of my light green here. And now I want to blend this line. So my dark green is still wet in here, my light green is still wet. So I'm just going to go in and blend the two up and down. And I'm only working back and forth like maybe an inch up and down to blend these two. I don't have to go really far. And drag it down a little bit further once they get pretty well blended. And there you go. That's it for blending. We've got our brush here and we have some of that light green and dark green, so we're just going to swirl it on our paper towel again and get off most of that paint, and then dip it back in that light green, and then go in and fill in the rest of that background up at the top. All right. Perfect. And then once you've reached this point, we're done with this big brush for now. So I want you to rinse it in your water really well. And swish it around. And then dry it off on your paper towel again. And then you can just set that one aside, because we likely are going to be completely done with that brush at this point. And then we're going to switch to these background trees. So we're going to get our little paintbrush out again, the one that we used for all of our turquoise lining. And we're going to switch to this dark blue now. Get your paintbrush nice and coated in there. And remember in the beginning I said that our light source was going to be coming from the left side of the painting. So all of our shadows are going to be on the right side of all of these trees here. So, and remember, don't paint this middle portion of the trees, because these trees are going to be in the background. So we'll start over here. And again, you kind of can't do this wrong. So I'm pretending that this is a tree, and this is a little individual tree, and that this is its own tree, and this is its own tree. So every kind of like hump up is going to be its own tree. So I'm going to create some shadows based on those being their own little trees. And another one here. And another one here. So basically, I'm filling in, if these were all their own little individual trees, I would be filling in the right side of each of these trees. Then I'm also going to take this one and just draw a dark blue line about halfway across, and that's our shadow that's coming off of these trees as kind of a whole. I'll go in and put that in there, and some more up here. And I am making sure that my blue does line the full bottom of these trees down here. And then I'll go in and do this one. And if you have questions on any of this stuff, I realize you can't ask me now because we're all stuck in our own homes, but you can send me a direct message or you can comment on the post, whatever you'd like to do. All right, so there we got in the dark part of our tree. So I'm going to take that brush that you had and just swirl it off on your paper towel again. You don't have to rinse it. And then we're going to take this dark green color that we did for our foreground. We're going to get a bit of that paint. And then we're using this as kind of a transition of the shadow to the highlight. So between where we just put in all that blue want you to put it in, but leave a little bit of the tops of each one of those individual blobs. Just leave it white. So we're going to put some highlight in there. And acrylic paint, especially the kind that we're using, doesn't tend to be quite as opaque as some other types of acrylic paint, which means that you just get a much more vibrant paint color when you're painting over just a plain white canvas, which is exactly why we're just highlighting around all of the parts rather than painting the entire canvas turquoise. So I took my paintbrush and I didn't rinse it again. I take that back. I am going to rinse it. I'm going to take some of that green off of there. I rinsed it and I wiped it off on my paper towel. So I have a mostly clean brush. And then I'm going to take this light green that we just used again in the background there. And all of these little spots on the trees, I'm just going to put that green in there. So that's our highlight with it, where the sun is hitting these trees. And if your brush gets dirty when you're dragging it through the other paint that is still going to be wet, just wipe it off on your paper towel again. See, I got some paint on there. I'm just going to wipe it off before I dip it back in my light green. And there. And here. And because they're not just their own single individual line of trees, I'm going to go through and add in just a couple more highlights in these darker areas, as if there were some smaller trees in there too. And a little bit up in there. All right, and that's it for those kind of foreground trees. We're going to rinse our brush off completely because we're going to paint in these trees that we left empty there in the middle. And for these ones, we're going to go, got my brush all nice and clean again. We're going to go back with that original turquoise color that we lined everything with. And we're just going to paint all that white back out. So just in that far section of trees. And we're doing this, helps us create some depth to the painting, because as items get further from the viewer, they kind of lose their color and kind of start to absorb and turn a bit of a blue color. I like to think of them as kind of a transition from their normal color and that of the sky, which brings us to the sky. So I just filled in that turquoise color, and you don't need to wipe off your brush, or you don't need to rinse off your brush for this one. You can just wipe it off. And we're going to take some of this turquoise and just put a little blob on our palette, and then we're going to mix in a bunch of white with it. And we're going to keep going. It's going to look really pale, like it's not going to have a lot of color, which is exactly what we're going for. And I'm going to start filling in some of the sky. So since the light is coming from the left-hand side, I'm going to fill in a good portion of this, and then I'm going to taper off into a line about here where the sky is going to get a little bit darker. So it has kind of a gradient. And we're going to fill in right up to that tree line and over top of some of that turquoise there. And going straight up to the cloud and filling in all of that space in between. And if you start to run out of your paint color, you can just add in another dab of turquoise and another glob of white. You can always start with less paint. It's kind of a bummer when you reach the end of a painting and you have this massive puddle of paint left on your palette. But acrylic paint is fairly inexpensive, so not that we want to waste it, but it generally isn't a huge investment. All right, got most of my sky of the lighter color filled in before I switch over to this darker color. And I'm working left to right, because we're going to do the same thing. We're going to blend this line again once we transition into a bit of a darker blue. So it's not a bad idea to have this kind of line here be a little bit more wet last thing that you painted. And I actually like to make it almost a line. That way I don't have these kind of weird in and outs of where I've been blending. All right, and then you're going to take your brush, and you don't have to rinse it again, just wipe off that excess paint. And then we're going to take a little bit of this dark blue, and we're going to mix it here, and then we're going to add in some white. And I'm just mixing this right on top of that turquoise that I used for the sky. So in terms of the color family, it's definitely more purple, but in terms of the contrast, it's about the same level as the color that we just used. So I'm going to add that in on that line, right up to my trees, and up off the corner of the, not the corner, but the side of the canvas. And then I'm going to just blend that a little bit. And then I'm going to take my palette again and add more of this dark blue. Go darker, darker, darker. I'm going to go even darker yet. So I like to get pretty dark in this last corner. And we're going to start from over here. Working the whole corner, and then we're going to work in towards all of that lighter blue that we just created. And you can wipe off some of your excess paint as you do this too. It just makes blending a little easier if your brush ends up a little drier rather than covered with a whole bunch of paint. And I like to see brush strokes in there, so I don't think you need to worry too much about having those brush strokes hanging out in there. And then we're going to take the same color that we just had, and this is what we're going to use to do the shadows on our clouds. So we're going to draw one line of paint right across the bottom, and then come in and fill in parts of those clouds. So with the trees, we added the highlights on the tops of the trees. With the clouds, we're going to add the highlights kind of on the side of the cloud, because if you're thinking about the sun and how it rises through the sky and then starts to set, right now the sun would be shining towards the tops of the trees, and then it's shining kind of up towards the clouds a little bit. So do that to this one as well. And highlight, or not highlight, but shadow in some other parts of those clouds too. All right, and then I'm going to wipe off my brush, but I'm not going to rinse it. So with my dirty but not paint soaked brush, I'm going to take a glob of this white, and then I'm just going to mix my brush in it, and you can see that it turns into this nice kind of turquoisey really light, almost lavender color, because it's taking all those colors from the sky that we just used. And then I'm going to use that as the highlight for my clouds on both of these. All right, and then I'm gonna rinse my brush off on this one because we're gonna go through and add in a few more highlights yet, but I wanna do white on this one. So I cleaned my brush and I got my white, and I'm gonna just really lightly set my paintbrush down and then kind of lightly kind of lift it up just slightly and then push it back down. See, I'm getting kind of a varied thickness in the clouds, and then it kind of trails off. Because usually when we see clouds, we don't see just one type in the sky. And I'm even going to add it to this tail of the cloud that we talked about at the beginning of the painting. And you can add a few more highlights into your clouds. So you can see on this one, since I'm painting wet on wet, I didn't let these clouds dry really at all in between this. I'm really globbing the paint on, so this is another reason why I really like keeping my canvas set flat, because if this was standing upright, this paint would start dripping down. All right, one more over here. Then we're going to take our paintbrush and we're going to rinse it off again. And we're going to keep working with this small paintbrush. And we're going to fill in our red poppies now. So rinse off your brush, make sure it's nice and dry. And we've got this beautiful red color here. I'm going to fill in my red poppies in the foreground first. If you have that medium-sized brush, you could potentially use that for these poppies. It's really your preference, and depends a bit on how big that you made these poppies and how big that your canvas is that you started with. So lots of different variables to this. All right. And again, I like to see some brush strokes in paintings, so I don't worry too much about having a solid colored flower. I like some of the variation that comes with having some variation in the thickness of the paint. And as you finish your pieces, I'd love for you to post them on Facebook or Instagram and tag me in your paintings. Because normally at the end of a paint party, I would have you hold your pieces up and we'd all celebrate the work that we created and see how everybody's individuality came out in the work. And we can't do that right now in person. So I'd love to be able to see all of the cool works that everybody else out there created. So I've got my foreground poppies in, and then this is kind of the middle ground poppies. I'm going to paint those in too. really like how the turquoise makes the red really pop. Whenever I do work as a fine artist in acrylics or oils lately, I always leave some of the background showing through. Just little bits here and there because it really adds some nice dimension to the painting. All right. And then most of your foreground is going to be pretty dry up here. I do have some kind of globby spots that I got. So I'm going to add in some kind of smaller poppies or poppy seeds to the side of our paintbrush in that same red that we had before. And you can just kind of use it as almost like a stamp and just be kind of random with where you place them. And the further you go up, the smaller you'll want those brush strokes to be. Because if they were a group of flowers or single flowers, again, the further they get away from you, obviously the less of it you'll be able to see, the less definition and size. And then for these background poppies, I'm going to take my red and somewhere on my canvas, I'm going to put some red, and then I'm going to put a little bit of white in there too, just so we lose just a little bit of that intensity. And it still stays in the red family. It doesn't go too pink, but it tones the color down just a little bit. So I'm going to use that to fill in my poppies that are back in the background. If you feel like you can't quite get the color right, you can just stick with a solid red. You do not have to mix any white in there if you don't want to. But I like how it adds some more depth to our piece. All right. And we're done with our red for now. So I'm going to rinse off my brush again. And I'm going to take my black and I'm going to fill in where the little black poppy seeds would be. And I'm just using this small flat brush again. You don't have to be real perfect with that. And you can even add in a couple back in here just to show that there's a little bit more depth. And if you really want to, you could even add in a couple into just a few of these. All right, we're done with our black. So go ahead and rinse off your paintbrush again. We have just a few more things left to do. So we've got our paintbrush nice and clean and dry. And we're gonna go back to this green, this real light green again. So we've got to add in some stems for these paints, or for these poppies. So I'm going to do a stem for this one and a stem for this one. You don't have to go any specific direction. I like to kind of vary where my stems go. And you don't have to drag it all the way down to the bottom. You can just kind of let it disappear if you want. I'm going to go in, oh, too much paint. I'm going to go in and do that on some of these ones too. And I'm just real lightly getting just a little bit of paint on there, and then I'm kind of flicking it down from the bottom of that piece of paint, spot of paint. And then it's still a field with grass and other flowers and things. So I'm going to go back in after I put in some stems to those poppies, and I'm just going to add in some more blades of grass and such. And again, they're bigger in the foreground And then as you go into the background, you get a little bit smaller as we're working away from the viewer. And it's kind of at your discretion how many of these that you want to do. I personally don't think you can really do too many because it gives some nice kind of contrast and detail, and just rather than just that dark green. You can even add it up into this blended area that we did. Just make sure they're really small brush strokes up in here. That one was a little bigger than I wanted, but that's okay. You'll notice, as I talked about before, that acrylic paint kind of loses its intensity. So our red spots that we did over top of the green, they kind of die back down into the canvas. And that's happening too when you put this light green on here. It starts out as a pretty intense color, and then as it starts to dry, it loses its intensity. But in this case, I like how that adds to the depth of the piece. All right, then we're gonna rinse off our brush when you're happy with all of those markings that you made with that light green in the foreground. Then we have just one final thing left to do. And honestly, this is my all-time favorite. I call them tree holes. I don't know what other artists call them, but we're going to add some depth and definition to these kind of blobs of trees that we have in the background. So we're going to take our small paintbrush, the one that we've been using this whole time. You're going to wash it, rinse it, sorry, and dry it really well. And then we're going to take some of this turquoise that we used to line all of our paint marks. Now you don't need a whole bunch of paint on there, and we're just going to add in some kind of random dashes down at the bottom. And you see how that immediately creates the feel that there are some trees back there. You can actually see like the stumps of the trees. I'm just gonna add in a couple more there. You can even add in a couple there towards the top. See how that suddenly adds in some definition and separates those trees in there? Add one in there. Another one in there. And we're using this color in particular because it's the color of the trees behind us. So those would be the colors that would be peeking through all of these trees in the background. And a couple more. And that's it. That's our finished painting. Celebrate this piece of art that you created at home. I am really looking forward to seeing all of the pieces that all of you created. Send me photos, tag me, include a picture of you holding your painting up. I can't wait to see what you've created. Once your painting's completely dry, which mine is still wet, you'll just take your pencil, and then I want to make sure that you sign the front of your painting. You always have to claim the piece that you've put all this work into. So since my poppy is dry, I'm just going to put my name right there in the poppy in the front. Use your pencil because pencil doesn't fade over time. So if you use a pen, it'll fade over time, and painting can be really tricky to sign your signature with painting. So thank you for sticking around for this 45 minutes of video. I hope that you really enjoyed painting along with me today. Leave me some comments, give me some feedback. Let me know if this is something that you'd like to see again. I think the next one that I'd like to do is specifically geared towards kids. So can't wait to see you on the next one. Thanks, and happy painting from the Mobile Artisan.